Hello and welcome. My name is Tom, and this is the Ska Podcast, episode 4. And I have a very special guest for you on episode 4. We're going to pick it up right where we left off. Anyway, let's see. What was it? Yes, 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, my friend Mike Alvarez was here, who also composed that lovely theme song, which is very, very catchy. And he is back today. Because today we want to do it was supposed to be a very light look at the different waves of ska, but it ended up being what seems to be kind of a deeper dive. And what I mean by that is after Mike and I were talking a couple weeks ago on episode number 2, we decided like, hey, it would be really cool to cover the different waves of ska. And we agreed that that would be a cool thing to do. And we said, hey, let's do some research and then meet back and we'll record an episode. And so then Mike did all of the research and now he's here today and I pushed this button and that is what I did. So hello again, Mike.
Hey, everyone.
We're also doing a video version of this. So there's links and stuff in the description if you want to do Patreon and YouTube channel memberships and stuff. You get access to the video version, which, boy, you don't want to miss our beautiful faces. But
or that giant tub of Clorox wipes that's just sitting in the background there.
So if you want to see Clorox and overexposed backgrounds, patreon.com/Tompuck. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. Really, it's just because we were recording to record the show, and if there's a video element, heck, why not do something with it? So, Mike, you have been super busy, in addition to just being generally awesome guy, and you wrote an essay for us.
And I'm gonna be upfront about it. It's basically Wikipedia, but I did stuff in my own words, which I believe that is not plagiarism.
I think that's called fair use at this point. I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah.
They did cite their sources, so I tried to use anything that was cited properly, and anything that wasn't, I just kind of like moved away from.
Well, I'm excited to see what you cited. Where is it? Here.
Oh.
Yes. Nailed it. Where do you want to begin? Where do we want to go? I know we're sitting here in 2021, if you're listening to this in the future, but we need to kind of go back in time to get started with all this. So, obviously this is not a complete look. This is not like the definitive thing. This is just, hey, two people who've liked ska music for a long time. One of them did more official research than the other, and now we're talking about it. And it'll give you kind of an idea of how things have developed over the years, which is actually super fascinating. That was one of my favorite parts of when you were here last time, is you started kind of like going in a little bit on trying to trace the music, like where it came from and where different influences came from. And that's super fascinating. So that's kind of what we're diving into today.
Yeah. So the thing about ska, which is really interesting, is like historians have a general idea and they can kind of throw a dart into time and it'll hit something of truth, but there's still a lot of debate. So anything I have, some historians have agreed that like, yeah, this is what's happening, but then there is dispute of whether it's perfectly accurate or not. So just keeping that in mind. But as far as ska music goes, there are, to this date, 3 established quote unquote waves. And I think the wave can be defined simply as commercial popularity.
Right.
Did it have a cultural impact?
Right. Not necessarily. Yeah, it just sort of has to do with what people were interested in at the time. Obviously, for me, and probably for you, third wave was the one that, kind of hooked us in.
Right.
Not because it's, I guess the most recent-ish, but also because it was what was there when we were younger, and you just, you latch onto the music that's out there when you're younger, and it happened to be third wave ska. So Yeah,
Yeah.
I like that as the waves are, they're not official things like start dates, end dates, planned things. It's just waves of popularity followed by like times of less popularity.
Yeah. I think that's safe to say. People will argue about it, but I honestly think that the waves are established in just where there's a cultural impact. And so
Hmm.
ska actually has its beginnings right after World War II. Jamaicans started to buy radios, and within that scope, they started to listen to American music from the signals they can get, which was predominantly Southern rhythm and blues music. And so they were listening to people like Fats Domino, Barbie Gay, and Louis Jordan.
Okay.
And you know, let me see. So because America had bases stationed, so military bases,
Hmm.
Jamaicans were exposed to more music, and eventually people like Prince Buster. I swear to goodness, I kept looking at this name and I'm like, I'm going to pronounce it right. It's wrong. So Coxon Dodd and Duke
Nice.
Reed started to do these things called sound system, which I think might actually be what the Op Ivy song is based off of.
Yeah.
But what they basically used to do is they used to create these street parties where they would DJ the popular music at the time, and they would get these giant speakers, and it would just be this giant street dance. And they would just do this in Jamaica. It would just be something that happened in Kingston. And so they continued on and they would play popular American R&B music, but then in the late 50s it started to teeter as far as the music coming in. I'm sure, at that point rock and roll music toward the late 50s was starting to become very popular, so
Hmm.
it was a change in how music was coming into the country. And so um before we do that, actually, I wanted you to go ahead and play that first one.
Sure.
I have a song from Fats Domino's that I wanted, or Fats Domino, I wanted to play because I think it gives a good idea of where some of the ska inspiration from American R&B started to come from.
So this would have been from like the 1940s or so.
Yeah,
Okay.
it was either 40 or 50s.
So this is the Fat Man from Fats Domino. He has a theme and he sticks to his theme. I know he's going to start belting it out in a second. I do love like the old recording sound. There it is. I like it. The
So
first lyric is they call me the Fat Man because I weigh 200 pounds. That is I love it.
they were different times. They were different times.
So, what was I going to say? Oh, yeah. So we're not necessarily even talking about ska music specifically yet. We're just talking about the Jamaican, like what was influencing Jamaican music culture
Right.
at the time, which is like what becomes like proto ska, all these
Right.
different things
But
coming from different places.
I think even there you can kind of see the roadblock to what some future ska might sound like.
Hmm.
It's missing the Caribbean aspect to it, but you have that pushed beat, that
Hmm.
that little dun, 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 dun. And that's actually because it's blues. It was a
Yeah.
12-bar blues, all that, but then you have kind of like the rhythm that will become ska rhythm. So ska music kind of takes that rhythm from rhythm and blues and puts it over some of the traditional calypso and shoot,
Like jazzy stuff?
mento,
Oh, okay.
that's the style. So and so once music started to kind of change in America, producers in Jamaica were like, well, why don't we take their music and kind of put our spin to it? And so it's not set in stone what song or artist made ska famous, but a lot of people attribute the popularity to the Scatolites and to Derek Morgan. And so this next song is from Derek Morgan and I think it has a date on it too.
This is 1959, and this is Forward March from Derek Morgan.
Yeah, and so this is what some people may say was like kind of the first ska song. That might not be accurate, but it gives you a good idea of where ska was at that time.
So it gives you a good idea of, if not the first, at least one of the first, or, the
Yeah,
beginnings. You can at least see
exactly.
that. Okay, so here we go. Forward March, Derek Morgan.
Forward march!
Oh, there it is.
Gather together, be brothers and sisters, we're independent.
You can really hear everything kind of
Join
smashed
hands
together
to hands,
there.
children started to dance, we're independent. Won't be sudden blue.
That's good. you can really like feel it there.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is the late 50s. This is what everyone's rocking out to.
Yeah. And so ska begins its popularity right after that time. This is when it starts to make its way through because people are covering popular songs.
Mhm.
They're doing songs that already exist.
So ska
And
covers
now
have been around since the beginning,
Yeah,
basically.
exactly.
It's part of the culture.
And so ska covers go, and then there's a mix between covers and original music. And like I said, there's a debate of who it comes from, but I think that the Scatolites are probably they have one of the longest running
Mhm. It's
know,
crazy.
tenure. My
their
friend played, I think, with them or opened for them like 5 years ago. So
Yeah. And we're talking about the 60s now.
yeah.
So
they were going crazy, and I think I have one of their songs there, and this would have been one of the records that was getting made at that time. So Jamaica was actually starting to produce records and send them out. So the sound systems were then playing these records and moving forward with it. So Jamaica within itself became its own music industry, and eventually, led to reggae
That's
and rocksteady
interesting.
and stuff like that. But
'Cause, I mean, I know.
they
Sorry, go ahead.
well, it was, they were very industrious within themselves.
It's interesting because, I mean, this is like a very basic concept, but the idea of, like an island nation, a relatively small island nation, when something is happening culturally, it is kind of like everyone there becomes a part of it, especially pre-technology, well, not pre-technology, but pre-internet and stuff like that. You're sort
Yeah.
of just in the world around you, and so if there's something happening, it's just there's going to be like everybody's constantly sort of playing with this thing and like stretching it and evolving it and changing it. That's pretty cool. So you have a Latin go ska song.
Yeah. I this was around the time, this would have been in the 60s.
Mhm.
I picked this one because I really like this song. But
Fair enough.
I think it gives you a picture of like how versatile it was even in that time. Like it
Mhm.
wasn't a cookie cutter. Ska wasn't a cookie cutter necessarily. And so they were taking, the jazziness that was occurring in America and really making it their own. And so
Right.
here's that song.
I'm confused though. I've never known if it's the Scatolites or the Scotalites. And do you
I always
know?
thought it was this.
Because I always thought it was the Scotalites because ska. But then you said Scatal, and now I don't know. And I figured this is a good time as any to just be like, I actually don't know. And maybe I will not know.
I'm sure if you, for those at home, if you YouTubed, any interview from them,
Right. If only
or
there
a
were
live
way.
concert, yeah. If only there was
like a collection of all of mankind's knowledge. Anyway, I'm just going to use the internet to play the song right now. Don Drummond and the Scotalites or the Scatolites. I really like this.
Yeah.
This reminds me so much of like as a teenager getting into ska music and then trying to go back and discover stuff and like,
Right.
going through the older stuff, and it sounds so different but liking it so much.
Right.
Are we into a wave yet? Is this a first wave or is this
So this would be the first wave.
okay?
This is, and I don't, they weren't calling it the first wave because
Right. How would
they
they
had
know?
no idea of a second wave. But this is when ska was first established. And, I love that song because during the 60s, there was a tick in jazz music with Latin influence.
Mhm.
There's no, it's not a coincidence in that you have that song, but you also have I Love Lucy, which is the most popular sitcom in the world, which introduces the American public to a Cuban man
Mhm.
who plays Cuban jazz and has this Latin influence. And there are a ton of Latin artists who are making the rounds in America. And so that music's going to Jamaica. And, like that song has some of the tenets of this Latin jazz, but makes it its own. And
Mhm.
it has that just, I think one of the things that's very interesting in that time was majority of the music, there are some slow songs, but majority of the music, because it's dance music.
Right.
The whole point of it was to dance. And so it's all a lot of really upbeat, fun songs. And so the first wave is very fun. The first wave is very danceable. And it still is like, I
Yeah.
don't think I think it parallels with, you know, dance music in America, jazz music in America, in its musical, because, these are just musicians on the streets. And yeah, some of them are professional musicians, but they're just doing it in Jamaica. They're not like, you know, they're
It's
not
not.
going to school for
Yeah.
music to be like the greatest. They're just picking this stuff up and learning it. And a lot of them have been doing it their whole life, absolutely, and are outstanding musicians. But it's just so cool to see this, like, it's a really raw feel.
Yeah, there's like a grassroots thing. It doesn't seem to
Yeah.
have like the thing of the record company that's going out trying to find
Right.
the next big thing and then push them on all like the shows and stuff. Like I just keep thinking of that thing you do, the Tom Hanks movie where it's
Right.
just, obviously that's a fictional story, but like also not really because it's such
Yeah.
a commonplace
Right.
thing that happened and still happens. And this seems to be kind of like separate from that because it comes from a place of more of like pure just passion for the music and being a musician.
And I think that might have to do with, some of the producers were in that grassroots movement.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't have record labels who, are just rich people funding musicians to make more money. Like, I'm
Right.
sure that there's a profit in place, but it was producers trying to get these sound system things going. And
Yeah.
so they had to have music that was fun and good and danceable, and it was there. I don't know. I love what it came from, and hope that it, I don't know, goes back to that a bit.
Well, if only there
Which
were
I
current
think it
musicians
does.
who could create things and decide the path. Anyway, I do
Yeah.
see a note here which I am interested in. I want to make sure we don't skip over it, and that is the debate over where the name ska came from. Because
Yeah.
when you're making a new form of music, you're not like, this is gonna be called, like, you don't know that you're making a new form of
Right.
music. I can remember, this is sort of relevant, but like 11 years ago when I started teaching, I had a friend and she was like, how would you say, are you familiar with dubstep? And I was like, I am not. And she said, oh, it's like the popular music. If you ask any of your high school students, they will know all about dubstep. And in my mind, I was like, I just, like, the word dub and then step, I kept thinking of like reggae influenced stuff, Jamaican influenced stuff, and I was like, what a strange thing to like become popular in 2010 or something. And then of course I go like search up like dubstep stuff, which is not what I expected it to be.
Right.
But it was just like, it just made me think of what it's like when you're trying to come up with a name for something, or how things end up getting their names as time goes on. So anyway, not about dubstep. Stepping back to ska, what the heck? Where did that come from?
So the debate, I think, falls under who it's attributed to, but there is a consensus of kind of what it is. And so a lot of people believe that it comes from the sound the guitar makes. And
Right,
so
that's what I always thought.
I have a guitar right here.
Oh, perfect.
And so there's that scratching on the, that's gonna fall. There's the scratching on the strings, and the rumor, or the legend, as so it goes, is that when people would tell guitar players like how to play it, they would go like, make your guitar go ska 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 ska.
Okay.
And so there was like the and so that it literally is kind of like onomatopoeia. Like, it's just that sound that turned into a
you
word.
keep calling it a rumor and a debate, so that is basically the story I've always heard, and I was like, okay, it makes sense.
So the debate is, I don't have the names in front of me, but the debate is that who attributed it. And so there was like a bass player who would tell his guitar players what to do, and a lot of people would say that he did it. There was another musician that people would attribute it to him, and then there was either that same bass player who had a greeting, and that greeting started with ska.
Interesting.
And so no one knows if it was that bass player, the guitar player, the culture in itself, or that greeting.
Do we know who the bass player was and what the greeting was?
Yes, we can easily.
Because I'm curious, is this where the origins of like forcing the word ska into other words? I think it's called like a portmanteau when you combine words. Like, is that also something that's been there from the beginning? Is just people just taking it? Because it's such a short, simple word, and just the way that it's spelled and the letters that it has, it lends itself very naturally to being like put into other things, which I do know, at least currently or modernly, is sometimes disdained by like ska fans if you have a band that has ska in the title or you make a stupid ska pun. I love it because it fits in line with me as a person very much. But it's interesting if that was like kind of there from the get-go.
Let's see. Where did it go? Ska
Isn't
beans.
isn't that a title of a song we're gonna play in a second? Where'd you go? Wait, where is it? There it is. All right.
Um.
I mean, we don't have to. Here's also something.
Here it is. Here it is.
Okay.
Sorry. There are multiple theories about the origins of the word ska. Ernest Ranglin claimed that the term was coined by musicians to refer to the scat, the strumming of the guitar. Another explanation from a recording session in 1959, produced by Cox and Dodd. Double bass player Clute Johnson instructed guitarist Ranglin to play like ska, ska, ska. Although Ranglin has denied this, a further theory is that it is derived from Johnson's word skavui.
Oh,
That was, and which was known to greet friends. So he would greet friends and say skavui.
I like that.
But let's see. Jackie Midu insisted that the musicians called the rhythm staya staya, and that it was Byron Lee who introduced the word ska. Derek Morgan, who we just heard, he just said that the guitar and the piano making the ska sound like ska ska. So the debate isn't necessarily like where it comes from in the sense of what brought it out. Everyone kind of says it's the sound. It's the sound of the guitar and the piano. Who did it? That's what's kind of up in the air. Skavui is going to be how I introduce myself from now on. Yeah. Skavui, children.
Students. That's also, I'm sure it's been done, but just a fantastic band name also.
Skavui.
By the way.
If Brian Setzer decided to go ska, that would be his album.
I mean, he must be like 96 years old now, but yes. I'm just kidding.
He
Brian
still
Setzer
does his Christmas show.
I
Brian,
know. I love Brian Setzer, but he's like a million years old at this point. Okay, so anyway, sorry. Getting back on track here to where we're at now.
Alrighty.
And the thing I wanted to add, though, real quick, as we're fumbling our way through facts and trying to unpackage things, if you have a bit of knowledge or you're listening to this and you're screaming at your speakers like, you idiots, don't you know, blah, 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 feel free to send an email to ska@himynameistom.com. I should change that to skavui, but I won't, because how do you spell that? And feel free, you can do
Skavoie.
Oh, I thought there'd be like some silent L's in there. Anyway, you can send in text, you can send in audio, you could send in video, however you want to communicate something, thoughts, whatever, about anything to do with today's episode. Please feel free to do that. So I'm just putting that out there because I know how it feels when you're listening to something. You're like, oh, they didn't know this or they didn't mention that. And, you know, please feel free to fill in some of the gaps here. That would be awesome. Anyway, back on track.
So that gets us to kind of the end. Bob Marley and many others started out playing ska, and then they started to change the vibe from a kind of dancing music to the slower, more reflective music. And there are different musical ticks to reggae and rocksteady and stuff like that, but they started to go away from ska, and reggae became very popular. Bob Marley was very popular.
Yes.
While he was alive. It wasn't a post-mortem popularity. Like, while he was alive, he was very popular.
Off the top of your head, and you can just say no, but do you have a clear difference between rocksteady and reggae? Because they've always sort of been like, I know that they're separate, but in my mind, I don't know how I would describe what makes them separate.
In my head, I don't necessarily have it. My understanding was rocksteady still about and all of that, but in popularity, rocksteady was very short. Like, it was just a couple years, and then reggae kind of broke from that. So I think if you were to put it on a scale, it's like ska, rocksteady, and then reggae. Reggae taking the influence of both. That's my understanding. I could totally be wrong. I think the difference is just how the guitar is played and maybe the rhythm section.
That makes sense.
Because I know
that makes sense.
with reggae music, the rhythm section, the bass can be very sparse throughout it, and so the guitar is kind of the leading person in it in a lot of ways, or the organ or whatever it might be.
Right, the thing that's making the
and
ska
I think
sound.
rock steady might be a little more of a steady rhythm section.
Okay.
I could totally be wrong, but I believe that's what it is.
I mean, just based on listening to music, that makes sense to me. So I'd be interested. So that kind of then now we've gone through the first wave,
Right.
And now, so the first wave of ska that's dying out in popularity. We're in the mid to late 60s at this point.
Yeah.
1960s.
So we're in the late 60s, and so we have to take a car ride to sorry, I can't even make that joke. It's so dumb. So we have to.
You literally wrote "jolly old England" in the
I know.
the notes here.
So cross the Atlantic to England. So in the 50s, and it actually starts before ska music really like ends. There's a big influx in immigration to England from Jamaica due to England's labor shortage.
Oh,
and
so
so
going out of work. I get it.
Yeah, and so you have the 50s and 60s of Jamaicans coming over to England, and then you have their kids being born. And so in the 70s, you have teenagers, Jamaican teenagers in England. And so the England political landscape was very rough. There was classism, racism, all of the above. And so one of the phenomenons that's occurring at the time is punk music. Punk music is mostly, now there are commercial shills and plants and whatever they call them now, but
Right.
there were record companies who saw the popularity of punk music and paid a bunch of rich white kids to go play punk music, and it got popular. But for the most part, the punk scene was composed of runaways, people who were politically dissatisfied with the status quo, and the underclass, the poor.
Wait, so you're telling me that a record company took music from other cultures and appropriated it to rich, affluent white people in order to turn a profit?
I know.
That must have been the only time that's ever happened.
Unheard of.
Sorry.
No, that's pretty solid. But punk music was really making its way through in the early 70s, like 1970 and on. And we have a song from one of the classic punk bands.
Yes, we do. Here we go. Boom. So that's White Riot from The Clash.
Yes. Still solid.
That's a good song.
Yeah.
All these are good songs. I'm glad I have this playlist now.
So The Clash in particular actually was coming together with some of these Jamaican kids who are first generation English, who don't fit in because they even in this punk scene, even in this counterculture, there's a fair bit of racism. There's a lot of pushback, and the Clash started to really embrace the Jamaican culture and ska music, and they started to play some of it. And while they're doing that, there are English white kids and now first generation English Jamaican kids who are coming together and creating their own form of ska where they're taking this punk influence, which is a more straightforward drum, so no swing. They're still kind of taking that sometimes walking bass line, but the nice flowy movie bass line of rhythm and blues, keeping the ska guitar, but they're also using the punk vocals. And so, punk vocals simply just it's not the clearest, it's not the cleanest, it's
Right.
whatever. And
It's
they're also
whatever.
it's my
whatever.
voice. It's what, and then they're taking, so ska music has actually been political since the start, but they're taking these things that they're feeling, going through, and talking about it. And so, one of the staple two-tone bands, which is started by the Specials, because they their singer started a record label and called it Two Tone. And I guess you could say the two tones being the mix of the English, mix of the Jamaican. But what was really cool is the whole purpose of it was bringing unity between the white English people and the black English people, and bringing the unity together. And that's where we get like the checkered flag, all that stuff. And it is shown in the lyrics and it is shown in the music, but it is very a unifying front from two tone on. Not that wasn't there in the first wave, but it had to be prevalent in the second wave because there was that joining of two different cultures in a way that wasn't long distance. Right. The first wave was joining of two cultures. It was American culture and Jamaican culture brought into one, but there weren't a bunch of like white immigrants in Jamaica making that happen. And
it was just through the radio and through media,
right?
And such.
But this is actual like physical connection with two different cultures. And so we have Gangsters from 1979, and funny enough, from the Specials. And so there's no, I had a thought and then it went away. So
he said, funny enough, I'll play this. Maybe your thought will come back to you.
Okay.
Combination of everything that you talked about right there. I remember getting this album as a kid and I loved it, but I didn't know like the history and stuff behind it. I just knew it was like it felt like quieter than the third wave stuff I was listening to.
Right.
But this was a great album.
Right.
But you can hear everything.
Yeah.
Wow. All the elements are there.
Right. So you got that electric guitar coming in. You have the straight eighth notes for the drums. Even though it's like, I think nowadays we have that like, punk rock's fast. But that was considered punk in that time because it was just the structure of it all. And so his vocals are very punk. You have the electric guitar coming in with the dirty but you still have the traditional ska guitar going in there. You have a nice keyboard filling in the space a little bit, and then the bass line. What's great about that song in particular is he moves around.
Here, let's listen to the bass. Let's hear a little bit more.
Yeah.
That's a fun bass line.
Yeah. It's responding in a walking manner. it's filling in some of the guitar stuff, and then it's kind of pulsing at the same time.
Yeah.
So it's doing like 3 different things at the same time, which is awesome.
Yeah,
And so
really.
there are tons of bands. There are bands who don't have Jamaican American members in it who are just influenced. There's the English Beat, Madness. There's a ton of ska bands in England at that time who really embrace it and create like a commercial success for it. And so I guess that's in a lot of ways why that is the second wave, is, you know, with the Specials and English Beat, Madness, and many others, there was this just hit where they were playing this on the radio. This was getting played on the radio. And so it created a wave. And now you do have music moving, like ska music's happening in more than just England. But that's kind of where the
second wave came from.
Yeah.
So first wave Jamaica, second wave England, and now we're into late 70s. Well, that's 1979, the song Gangsters we just heard. So now we're into the 80s.
So now we're into the 80s. There's tons of second wave going on. And then in the late 80s, ska gets more introduced in America. And so you have bands like the Toasters who are kind of really starting to do some stuff in New York, who are still kind of holding to that two-tone vibe. But also on the East Coast during this time, punk starts to move along and is moving toward hardcore. And so you have ska, which is already influenced by punk, but then you have bands who are starting to take it a little further.
Right.
And so we're going to listen to, you know, Mighty Mighty Boss Tones, Where Did You Go? And the thing about this song is, even though it doesn't feel like it, the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones were like one of the first bands to really do ska-core, where they're mixing ska music and hardcore music.
Yeah.
And so we'll hear it
in a different way.
Hello?
Checked the clock when I got home and realized I was alone. Sat for hours by the window wondering where did you go? Couldn't eat or sleep at all. Took the pictures off the wall. Paced the places, time was slow, and I'm wondering where did you go? Where'd you go?
Do you know what year this came out exactly? I don't know off the top of my head.
This song?
Yeah, or the album. Early 90s. Just the reason I bring that up is because literally they have a new album that came out this year, you know?
Right.
And it's so, I love the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones. And it seems like to me they're a really good example too, at least in American culture, of seeing a band on stage where the people in the band actually look different. Like there is diversity within them as musicians, and obviously within their styles. And they're just so good. They've been going so strong for so long, and it's very strange to, I don't know if you've heard like any of their new album or if you listen to it. It's fantastic, but they also like reference the pandemic in it and stuff. And so it's very strange to hear them talk about like flattening the curve and things like this. And I'm like, I don't know, like I love it. I love that it's still a very active thing. But anyway, so going into hearing that kind of stuff.
They had been established for a while. So they started in the late 80s. But that EP came out in 91. And so we're rolling into, so the late 80s did have ska music in it, but the third wave hadn't necessarily hit yet, where it was like a cultural phenomenon. And so what actually made it that cultural phenomenon is what we talked about earlier, is basically record companies started to see, you know, the leaves kind of form, and they started to put a lot of money into it. And so there was this giant influx of ska music in the mainstream, which we have our next.
Still such a good song. So that's Sell Out from Real Big Fish. I know the album was 96, 97. Around there. Obviously, Real Big Fish had been around since before then.
Yeah, they had been around before that.
But this is interesting, though, because you can hear, like, Matt Wong's bass lines are crazy. The bass is all over the place. But you have such a mix of, which, you know, like bands have been doing, but third wave, I think, for me at least, is really... like one of the signature things is that mix between like straight up distorted like punk guitar, then going into clean upstrokes. Sometimes you even have distorted upstrokes, and it's like it's a very different thing than what I associated with or what I heard in like second wave bands.
Right. And I think the third wave can how I would describe the third wave is it's the kitchen and the sink all together. Like it's everything in the kitchen and the sink. Like it's ska music. Ska is the foundation of what it is. The traditional ska music, the guitar, that upstroke on the offbeat, that is the foundation of it. Mm-hmm. But then it's whatever the culture brings at that time. And so, you know, we had 90s punk rock was the influence. And so one of the big things about the third wave was they were like, well, let's go ahead and break the boundaries on it. And instead of trying to keep it all the ska guitar, let's just do punk throughout and then sprinkle the ska guitar within it. And I think you could still hear the ska influence even in the punk sections. As far as the rhythm goes, like Matt, you know, he's doing his walking bass line even through the punk
the distorted guitar. Oh, plus the way the distorted guitar often plays with the horns is interesting because the guitar is making room for like a specific melody or following a melody of horns, which is in woodwinds and stuff.
Right. And so the third wave brought a lot of bands and a lot of commercial success. But the thing about the third wave that's interesting is it's not defined by any particular style. Mm-hmm. Even though we hear Sell Out and people are like, well, that's the third wave. Then you have bands like Hepcat who sound like this.
Go on and treat me like a church. Well, when he comes to play, girl, if I'm so bad,
which is something that, like, if you didn't know any better and you heard Hepcat, you'd be like, well, that's, you know, second wave stuff. They must be from the 60s or the 70s, but it's the same. It's at the same time that all this other stuff is going on, and that's pretty interesting. So it's like it's almost that, like you were saying, the third wave is everything in the kitchen sink. It's less to do with specific styles and maybe more just like cultural things happening or, you know, like larger things around which the music was created inside of.
Right. And so I think the third wave is the third wave because of its commercial success. Mm-hmm. I think that's why it's an established wave. But I don't think you can really have any parameters on it because we have bands who are out nowadays who sound very traditional or like Hepcat, but they're in that third wave.
Yeah,
they're still in it. Which I'm going to say when it has the little dash over it, so like it D and then the E has the little dash. I forget what sound that has.
I only have an English degree. I wouldn't know.
So, Alex Desert.
That's what we'll go with.
Sure. He's the lead singer for Hepcat, but did you know he's now the voice of Carl in The Simpsons?
No, I know they had recast
Yeah.
a bunch of stuff, but I had no idea.
Yeah.
That is pretty cool.
So ska breaks through all
things, which was really
full
fun.
circle.
Like 3 years ago, I got to see Hepcat at the Back to the Beach Festival. I think we talked
Right.
about that last time because that was such a crazy hodgepodge. By its nature, it was mostly third wave and modern bands just because it was people who were actively still
Right.
performing. But it was crazy to see, like, you could see the Interrupters and Hepcat and the Aquabats and the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones and Goldfinger, like, and like Suicide Machines and stuff. You just see all this different stuff taking place, but it's sort of,
Right.
you know, it all was connected in one way. I have a very interesting story about the next band. Well, I don't know if it's interesting so much as a story.
So, but you know, I wanted to make a note that the songs I picked weren't necessarily like, these aren't the whole scope of it. These aren't just like my favorite ones. These are just ones that I know, like, a broad spectrum of people have heard it or have
It's a
some
good
association with
representative
it.
sample of just like, hey, here's some of the stuff we're
If
talking
you
about.
want to hear more of this stuff, and if you have something like you want to see more female artists, you want to see people of color, it exists. You know, it's in there. Speaking of which, you know, there are bands there was Hepcat who took it their more traditional way, and then there are people who just went the other direction, like this band. In a mosh now.
Oh boy, yeah. So that would be Voodoo Glow Skulls, the band Geek Mafia.
Yeah, and you know, this gives it that, you know, Chicano influence.
Yeah.
This is like Real Big Fish. This is I think they're from like East LA. I might be wrong, or Riverside. But they're West Coast. And so, you know, even within America, the gamut of who's being influenced by it and who's jumping into this is starting to grow.
Well, this specific album or this specific song, Band Geek Mafia, actually brings up a point and a thought that I had, which was in the prior waves you were talking about. It's like, it's these musicians. Some of them are really classically trained. Some of them are self-taught, but it's like these lifelong musicians. Whereas it feels like there's a lot of people in third wave bands who actually did come from school bands. Like that was kind of where their exposure came from, was they were in the band at school. They're playing trumpet, trombone, whatever, saxophone. Especially I'm thinking of like horns and stuff. And they, you know, you're playing the traditional selections that you would play in a band class that your super cool band teacher would select for you. Or then when you're done and you're just hanging out with your friends and you have a trumpet sitting there and your friends have a guitar, like it's sort of, to me, it's like a different, it feels like, not having been a band kid myself, but it feels like that would have been a really cool outlet of like, oh, like I thought you could only be in a band like on your own if you played guitar or played drums or something. But it's like, there's a spot for my trombone over here. Like that's crazy, you know? And I feel like that kind of probably did open it up to a new generation of musicians to kind of join in and create stuff. I could be wrong, but
I think there's validity in that.
Darn right, there's validity.
Trying to think of it like, you know, Aaron Barrett started out on trombone.
Yeah.
And him and Scott, and I think the horn sections from Real Big Fish, they were in the Scholars. That was like their first band.
Yeah.
And
well, I'm even thinking of like, I this is different timelines, but I'm even thinking of like Suburban Legends. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, like Rump Shaker and some of their earlier stuff, like they're literally like music teachers, like helped them record it. And you might know this better, but I think it was Catch 22, like the original lineup, their original songs. Like I think they might have even had like some of their like teachers recording with them on it. That was a thing that I had heard at one point.
There might be validity. It wouldn't surprise me.
Right.
Like, it
Which is
wouldn't
just very
shock me
different.
because, like, in a lot of ways, there is that, in some ways, like, especially third wave ska horns, they
Mhm.
kind of perform like marching band horns.
Yes, it's
They're
very
just
bright and
loud, they're
very
up
like
front, right? And so I do think there is that influence there.
Now,
Whether
sorry,
it's
go ahead.
conscious or not, you know.
I wanted to bring up before we move on. This is actually a personal story that involves the both of us. I don't know if you remember this from 2008. We went on a little trip, and the reason was our ultimate destination. This is a very music related trip. Was to go to LA, to go to the El Rey Theater, to be in the pilot for the Aquabats TV show that they were filming. Now, this is 2008. The Aquabats Super Show did not premiere until 2012, if I'm not mistaken. So this was pre that. This was like they were self-producing their own pilot to kind of like pitch around and get a thing produced. And there was a call out, we need extras because there's going to be like a music scene and a concert scene. It's totally free. And in our minds, we're like, it's free. You go, you hang out with the Aquabats all day. Plus they're filming something for a TV show. This is going to be amazing. And the day before, we could go see, because we're in the area, we actually did go to Disneyland. And, I think we were spending a lot of time being loud and obnoxious, talking like John DiMaggio, the voice of Bender, on rides. I remember this. And that night, there was a concert at the House of Blues that is now torn down, but the one that used to be in downtown Disney, and it was Voodoo Glow Skulls. And I forget who else. Oh, and it was Chase Long Beach, Suburban Legends, and Voodoo Glow Skulls. And we saw them, and Chase Long Beach opened, and they were like, at the time too, they were, I don't know, 17 or 18. Like they were way younger than us. And
super
we were
young.
And they were so freaking good. And then Suburban Legends came out and killed it as always. And then Voodoo Glow Skulls came out and killed it. But my personal Voodoo Glow Skulls thing is, I had gotten into them. I worked at Target when I was in high school briefly. And one of the kids there was like one of the only other people I had met that was like into ska music, because you and I hadn't really even met at the time. And he was like, oh, if you like that, you got to get like Voodoo Glow Skulls. I was like, yes, I will do that. I got it. I liked it. I enjoyed it, but it was like it was like a lot of it was just too fast and too much for me to like hang out and enjoy and have fun with. So it wasn't like it just wasn't my thing. And when we saw them live, they went nuts, of course.
Yeah.
And the crowd went nuts. And that was at that point that we were like, I'm going to head out. We could go. And then I don't know if you remember, you must remember this now where I'm going with it. We were walking to the tram at Disneyland that takes you from downtown Disney to the Mickey and Friends parking structure. And it was like 10:30 p.m. And the sprinklers had just been on, so the sidewalk was wet. And we were running to catch the tram, and I slipped and fell and broke my wrist.
That's right. Oh my gosh, I do remember that. Oh my god.
Which was, I actually don't remember what the fall was like, but what I remember was I slipped and fell and it hurt.
It was so quick. It was so quick. I am remembering all of this now. It was we were running and then you were gone. And I was like, where'd you go? And you weren't like, woe is me. You were very like, ow.
What I remember is literally crawling towards the tram, like kind of comedically to sort of like, I was embarrassed I had fallen in a bunch of people and I didn't want to miss the tram, and like going and like getting there, and it hurt so bad. But I remember thinking like, I'll be fine. There's no way I actually got injured at Disneyland. And we had gotten like a little crappy hotel room that night. And I remember it was literally the next day where I was like, I have to go to the doctor. Like we can't go to, So we didn't get to go to the Aquabats Super Show. We got to go to the doctor, which was super fun. This is so related, but it is related because you know why it's related? If if Voodoo Glow Skulls had played a show that I had wanted to stay till the end of, this wouldn't have happened. And I'm sorry, but obviously they're listening to this. And
Clearly.
the bone that I ended up breaking, it wasn't like my full-on wrist. It was, you have all those little round bones that are in your hand, and it was like the biggest one of those got cracked, which hurt really bad. But I had I had an HMO at the time for my health insurance, so you don't get to go to who you need to see. You go to a doctor, and referral. So long story is, we went somewhere, they gave me like a brace and some medicine and stuff, and then it took over 2 months before I could actually see the doctor I needed to see. And by the time that happened, my wrist had healed, because I was like, I had broken wrists before.
Right.
And I was like,
you knew how to treat it.
Well, it wasn't in a cast, but I was like, I'm just going to live in this brace and not use it. Luckily, it's my right hand, because my job at the time was as a graphic artist, and I'm left-handed. So had I broken my left hand, don't know what I would have done. And when I finally saw the actual doctor, he was like, he did an exam. He's like, okay, this looks like it healed up really well. And he was like, it's a good thing you wore that brace, because if this had healed wrong, it could have, I forget the term he used. It basically would have like permanently stopped me from being able to use my wrist for the rest of my life. And I was like, yeah, cool. That's why I was like trying to go to the doctor constantly for the past 2 months, but I couldn't get the referral to see anyway, that's why I only stick with a PPO now, because this is health insurance chat. My name is Tom. Welcome to, we have changed now, but as ska fans grow older, things like health insurance become important. But anyway, that was a whole friggin' 2 months of my life that started based on us trying to go be in an Aquabats TV show and then leaving a Voodoo Glow Skulls concert. And
you know what's funny is, I think that like scared the crap out of me, because until you said it, I didn't remember the injury part. And I didn't have the like Aquabats show. I have the House of Blues in my head.
But you were like, you blanked on this whole concert.
Well, I had that, but when you started talking about the Aquabats thing, I was like, I remember that, but I don't think we went. And I was like, why didn't we go? And then as soon as you started saying it, I was like, oh, I remember every second of that. That was terrifying.
So here's another quick tangent that I'm okay with us going on. As I was wearing my brace, I was going to school, going to college classes, and there was somebody who I kind of knew in one of my classes. This is how I ended up meeting one of my best friends to this day, who ended up, as I was a high school digital media teacher, she ended up being the media teacher at the middle school program that fed into my program. So we have not been able to escape each other's orbits in 14 years now because of this. We hadn't really talked. We had lots of classes together, and I came in with my brace, and she was like, what happened to your arm? And I was like, oh, I like broke my wrist. And they asked how, and I said at Disneyland. I like slipped and fell and was running to the tram, and everyone kind of laughed at me because it's a goofy injury. And maybe like 3 weeks later, she came into class with a big boot on her ankle, like on her foot. And I was like, what happened to you? And she was like, I slipped and fell at Disneyland. And I was like, ha. Like, I get it. That's the stupid injury. And she's like, no, seriously, we were at Disneyland and it was late at night and the ground was wet and I was going to the tram and I slipped and fell and broke my ankle. I was like, oh my God. And then we've been friends ever since. So I don't think that's a problem anymore, but like, how many broken bones from
Probably
Disney?
a lot.
That was, but you know what? It led to me meeting a great friend through chronic injuries, because her pain is still there from that injury, and it's been a lot of years.
That's wild.
Anyway,
that's wild.
All of that. So thanks, Voodoo Glow Skulls.
Yeah, and then so Voodoo Glow Skulls went one side, and then the kind of commercial version of it was a very marketable, very upbeat, and quote unquote fun. And so this is one of the bands that also had success.
So this is Metallica. Sorry.
This is Say Ferris, and I'm pretty sure they get their name from Pretty in Pink. Oh no, Ferris Bueller's Day Off. But one of the things I wanted to mention about the third wave, so the third wave is kind of like the 90s on.
Mm-hmm.
You can argue about like where it established or where it became popular, but I think the 90s kind of really had its different runs in different places. And
Mm-hmm.
so the third wave is a very international scope. And so one of the next songs we're going to hear is what ska was doing in the 90s in Japan.
There's so much reverb in this. I love it. This is Tokyo Ska Paradise Orchestra. If you've never done so, go to YouTube and search up any video from them and just see how completely ridiculous their live show is and how, like, the term orchestra is appropriate.
Yeah. One, they're a huge band.
Yeah.
But two, they have shows in Japan where they're filling out a stadium. Like, it's a stadium of people, and then once the beat drops, it's literally thousands of people dancing. Like,
but dancing, not
thousands,
destroying each other, but like actually like dancing,
like skanking. Like,
yeah,
they're going for it, and it's one of the coolest things that I haven't gotten to experience. That I'm just like, every time they come to America, I'm like, sold out, dang it.
Yeah, which is crazy, and that's been the case since as long as I've ever even been aware of them, which is, you know, at least the past 15 years, like relentless, and it's awesome.
Yeah. But that song was from like 90 or 91.
Mm-hmm.
And so they were starting parallel with what was going on in America, but they had their own vibe. They're taking like 60s jazz and the ska sound, and it has that very like James Bond kind of vibe to it, which is such a cool way of doing it. And then this next group is from Argentina. So we've hit, UK, America, across the Pacific, and now all the way down in South America. This is what we're hearing.
Drums are ridiculous.
Gosh, that's so good.
Yeah, this is amazing. And I love it. It's exactly like you can hear the local influence on the greater thing.
Right.
You know?
Right.
And that's what is so cool.
What's fun about that song is they had this group, Los Fabuloso Cadillacs, they were going around in the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
They were actually going about, and they were kind of doing a a mix of things. There was a lot more of like that Latin influence. But like this song was an arrangement of a song they had previously done, and they just like amp it up 1,000%.
Yeah.
And I don't know, man, like the people who dog on ska music, I'm just like, what are you listening to? Because that to me shows like amazing musicianship, amazing talent, great musical writing. Like the horns working off of the keys, working off of the guitar, working off of the bass.
Mm-hmm.
It shows so much, and it's just like, what are you even like making fun of?
Yeah, I was watching a YouTube, like a music commentary video a while ago from a channel that I actually quite enjoy, but in it he was talking about, like, they were sort of talking about fads and things, and ska popped up, and he was like, I'm not even going to really mention ska because, like, what is there to talk about with a genre that had no real lasting cultural impact, and then moved on to something else. And I was like, wait, what? Like, are you...
Right.
Excuse me. That is... but then the rest of the video was about nu metal, and I'm like, okay, you can't say... Anyway, to your point,
Right.
yes, like, there's such a rich, like, global... I don't know.
And I
heritage
think
history there.
there's that, like, the commercial.
Well, it did become the wacky, like, if you were watching a Nickelodeon sitcom and something wacky was happening or someone was having a party, there's definitely some, royalty-free ska
but
music playing in the background.
I do think that idea of, like, the commercial surplus, like, it was like that episode of The Simpsons where the doctor's trying to tell Burns how sick he is, and he's fitting all of the things into the little
Stooges
door
syndrome.
frame. Yeah, and I think that was it. And so people were so, like, exposed to so many different things. And yeah, there were bands who were very playful about it. But, like Five Iron Frenzy, they were in the quote unquote Christian ska scene. And, everyone talked about how they were, like, the funny band because they had a song about, like, Canada, or they had silly songs, but they also had songs about Native American genocide and how the hyper patriotism isn't good. Like, they were saying, like, some really controversial things, but people were like, nah, Five Iron Frenzy, that's such a silly name. Like, I don't necessarily know what, why should I give a crap about, what, Hawthorne Heights? Like, that's a dumb name too. I don't care. Like, what it's
Most
the
band
idea
names
that
are
people-
ridiculous if you step back and look at them, but
yeah, most band names are. Like, I chose my band names in that irony of, like, I'm going to pick something stupid because it doesn't have anything to do with what I'm talking about. I don't
Yeah.
want to take it too seriously, but I'm going to talk about whatever I want, even if it includes, climate change, racism, whatever it might be at that time.
right.
And just, like, seeing the international impact of ska music really puts to light of, like, people who brush it off based off maybe their small splinter of information that they've gotten is really silly.
Yeah.
Really silly.
Definitely not a fully informed
Right.
position. Anyway,
So now to kind of go to the 2000s and to the present time, even though it wasn't, like, quote unquote commercial success in that it wasn't on the radio every day or anything like that, ska music kept going.
Mhm.
And so here's the next song that we're going to hear.
Which also, I'm going to set this up because we talked about this song specifically
Mhm.
in episode number 2. You're the one who introduced me to this band, and it was that one night you were picking me up to go somewhere. I walked outside, and in your car with the music turned up all the way, the windows rolled down all the way, this is what I heard.
And the story goes like everything was not for the money and the guns and everything figured out.
There's a lot happening here.
Yeah.
So everything goes numb. Streetlight Manifesto. Genuinely
But-
incredible band.
So this album, it, in the context of time, and if we're establishing that, like, a wave is that cultural influence or that commercial success, this happened after. This
Yeah.
missed that train of, like, commercial success. They were successful. They're still touring today.
Yeah.
They're amazing. And the fact is that, this wasn't being played on the radio.
No,
You wouldn't
I
hear
don't
this
think
on
I've
the
ever
radio.
heard that in them on the radio.
But musically, they're stunning.
Oh my
They're
God, yeah.
absolutely crazy good. And so the mainstream declined,
Mhm.
but that doesn't mean that ska music declined at all. I formed a ska band in 2008. Like, I think there was a steady flow of bands that were coming in. The older bands were still going, Real Big Fish, the Aquabats, Mighty Mighty Boss Stones, Suicide Machine, Big D and the Kids Table, Less Than Jake. Those are all groups that I know in the last 5 years have either been performing or doing new music.
Yeah, well, also
And
the
so,
way
like,
people got their music changed so much because that's when
Right.
like streaming services popped up and you could really dial down into your little niche thing here. It wasn't just like, let's turn on like the TV or the radio and just hear what is the popular music right now and we're all listening to it. So like I think
And
that
I think
also
that's-
plays a role.
And I think that might be where, like, if the conversation is like, is there a fourth wave or is the third wave continuing?
Mhm.
I think the answer is yes. I think it's both. I think we're still seeing the influence of the third wave, but I think you're right. I was looking on some bands that we'll talk about in a minute, like their Spotify, and they're getting 70,000 listens per month, like listeners per month. So that's 75,000 unique listeners per month.
Mhm. That's a lot.
That's that 20 years ago, if you would have sold 75,000 CDs, that's a huge accomplishment. Today, everyone reaches it so much. There's, the population's bigger. The way people get things is different. But I think that that's still an accomplishment. I think that that is still successful. Maybe the money looks different, but
Yeah.
that is reaching a large audience. And so I want to talk about one person in particular, Jeremy
Mhm.
Hunter. They are Ska Tune Network. My understanding of it, I didn't follow them until more recently in the last couple of years, but the streams of influence that they have had really comes through.
Yeah.
And so they had a YouTube channel where they covered songs. And one of the big things that I think was really smart and interesting about what they were doing was they were doing ska covers, but my understanding is they were in like an emo, they were in emo bands before,
Yeah.
but they were bringing in people who weren't ska musicians into these covers. And so there's like blanking on the name, but the singer from a band who does like math rock,
Mhm.
very complicated rock, and they were singing on a cover. And emo bands were singing on a cover, and rock bands and pop bands and different things like that coming together to sing these ska songs, which I think may have been what like brings people together. Now they have, hundreds of thousands of followers on YouTube, different things like that. And now they're moving into the original music, and
Mhm.
it's so good.
Yeah,
It's so
Jeremy's
good.
one of the
So
first people I think of when I think of like modern ska music, because you can go to that channel and the covers are amazing. Half of the time, Jeremy's the one playing all of the instruments,
right.
and it sounds amazing. And then there'll be guest musicians coming in to do vocals or whatever sometimes, but a lot of times it's just all a one person show. There's live streams where Jeremy will like compose songs live in a very laid back way. And it might just be the whole stream is dedicated to figuring out a bass line for a song or something. But
Right.
going through that entire process of thinking like, why should it sound this way? How should it sound this way? Let's record it 15 times till it sounds exactly right. It's completely fascinating to watch. And
And they are
so good.
they're a stunning musician. Like they are fantastic. Jeremy is a fantastic musician. And so we're going to listen to Jer, which is Jeremy's original project. They've released 3 songs so far, and they also play trombone for We Are the Union, which We Are the Union just came out with a new album, which is a fantastic album as well. But This is from Jer's project. Jer.
I wrote a message to my former self, afraid of the future, wasn't really too sure if anything would ever work out. Floating through the ether, waiting for the reaper. Jaded and burnt out, a 3-time college dropout. Not a single direction to meet the expectations.
So good.
It's so good.
But I think they're a good example of taking all the influences and really putting it, you know, their drummers doing the like traditional ska where the snare is cross stick and the snare and the kick are hitting on beat 2 and 4 with, you know, an offbeat or just a little more ornamental hi-hat, which isn't, you know, traditional, or it is traditional for ska, but like it isn't typical nowadays.
Right.
And so mixing in these many different influences. And so
I was just thinking when you were talking about like this third wave and fourth wave again, it's probably something we won't know until, like, you know,
probably
people in the first wave didn't know they were in the first wave. So it's you have to just wait until things evolve, and then you can look back. And not that it even has to be segmented, but that's when you could probably say like, well, this was a thing that started here and a thing that started here.
And I think there is a new wave, like new metal, but new wave in a lot of ways, where people are taking what has influenced them the last 15 years. And so, you know, Less Than Jake, Real Big Fish, some of those bands that are still around, they were influenced by like the 80s and 90s. And now we have people who are influenced by the 2000s and late 2000s. I'm not signed to them, not sponsored by them in any way, shape, or form, but my shout out is to Bad Time Records, because they have just been like record after record featuring different bands that do different things. And you could consider them in a lot of ways kind of propelling the new wave. They have Kill Lincoln, Bad Operation, The Best of the Worst, Catbite, which album, if this is coming out on Friday, is coming out today.
Yay, so if you're listening to this on release day.
Yeah. We Are the Union, and Joystick came out with one, and there's so many more. I'm pretty much buying every single record that gets released from them. I just got the Catbite record. I'm really excited for that release. But I think Mike, he's the lead singer and guitar player for Kill Lincoln. He also runs Bad Time Record. He really has just a way about what bands he chooses and different things like that. But, you know, to show, is there a new wave, or has third or fourth wave continued, or whatever it might be, Kill Lincoln just came out with a 7-inch, a split with Less Than Jake. And so you have Less Than Jake, which has influenced Kill Lincoln, together on an album. And so where does the line draw? I think, like you said, it'll be 20 years from now when we really see it. But like, I think one of the big differences between them was when the third wave came out, a lot of the bands that were in the second wave had stopped.
Yeah.
And when the first wave and second wave, a lot of the first wave had stopped in a lot of ways, not perfectly, but they had stopped. I think the difference in the third wave is a lot of those bands that were popular are still around.
Yeah, that is interesting. I never thought of that before.
Like Big D and the Kids Table, they're about to have a new album out. Goldfinger has released 2 new albums. Less Than Jake, I think they're working on a new album too. And so you have all these bands who are still around, and then just a whole group of people who are in their teens, in their 20s, in their 30s, who were influenced by these people, but also doing their new spin on it. And so we're going to listen to Kill Lincoln right now, who is kind of like Bad Times' flagship band, but I think that they're a great idea of what that influence of the 90s, 2000s has to offer for today.
Just so you know, I've never felt so low and slow. It's like my head is filled with vague ideas.
I really love the snare sound in this song.
Yeah. I'd be remiss to not mention, Asian Man Records, Mike Park, Bruce Lee Band. I believe they recorded at Mike's studio.
Oh wow, that's
for
cool.
that. So two worlds coming together. There's so much to talk about.
We've been going for a strong 90 minutes, so
yeah,
this has been quite the journey.
This is what I feel so bad because I know I'm missing out on people.
But we're not trying to be a definitive thing. This is just a really cool way. I mean, I learned a lot just from seeing how different things are influenced. Like I know stuff now that I didn't know 90 minutes ago, and that was ultimately the goal. Obviously there's so many blanks that can be filled in. And like I mentioned earlier, anybody who wants to add something, just do ska@himynameistom.com, send it our way and can put it in a future episode. But I mean, this was a really fun sort of journey around the world and through the decades.
Right. And so I think the thing I want to kind of leave with for this portion of it, I'm sure we'll talk in future episodes too more, but all the music we heard today was fundamentally influenced by what the people did in Jamaica. It is a Jamaican rooted world, and it's foolish to go forward and not look back and go, that's where the influence is. Even the the bands in the 90s today where it's just a bunch of white kids, they're fully influenced by Jamaica, the black culture that was there, and moving forward on kind of connecting that. And then as it goes on, the unity that it brings about, ska is
that's my favorite thing about it. 100%.
Ska is inherently anti-racist, and it's very it brings in all the different communities together, and I think that's awesome. Check out Bad Time Records, check out Mike Park, check out one of the ones that came out recently, Jeff Rosenstock, who he's been in ska punk bands for a long time, but he just came out with Ska Dream during the pandemic, and it's I can't stop listening to it. It's so good.
Well, you know what I'll do is I'll put a link in the show notes to the playlist that you made for this episode, so that way if people want to check out that playlist, they can check out those songs.
And there's a lot of great bands there. Again, so much that we could have talked about, should have talked about. We're missing so much, but we this
can
is
zoom
a blink
in later.
Yeah, but this is a great blink in the timeline that is ska music, and I think it's a good start, hopefully.
Well, thanks. I really, really want to thank you for putting all the time into putting this together and taking us on this journey and putting the playlist together. I really appreciate that. The easiest direct way to reach out to Mike is at Mike the Alvarez on Twitter, and I'll also have links in the show notes to all the different bands. Is there anything else you want to direct people to today?
Check out Catbite, because their album is coming out today, and so give them some love. And I don't know, Wikipedia, I guess.
Thanks, Wikipedia. For millennials and students everywhere, thanks, Wikipedia. All right, well, thank you again, Mike. Thanks to everyone for listening to this. This is the longest episode we've ever done. Hey, how about that?
Hey.
Again, totally would love to hear thoughts and feedback, additional info, and all that kind of stuff.
Absolutely.
And then we'll be back next week, and who knows what I'll be talking about then. And of course, Mike's going to come back, and we'll see him again in the future. Even if whether or not I want it to happen, it'll happen. I'm just kidding. I want it to happen. Bye, everybody.